ENCA's Sandy Makaula has been covering that story. Let's go right back to mid-morning if we can. Just walk us through very quickly how difficult it was, she said, to escape the house where she was being held, and why ultimately, Sandy, she didn't go through with it.
She said it was very difficult to escape the house. Firstly, she didn't have any money. Secondly, you must remember the hold that this man had over her. She was completely terrified of this man. He had completely control over every movement she had. She had to SMS him 5 times a day. He knew of her every movement, and she was completely terrified that she would die if she did anything against him. So she was completely convinced that she couldn't leave this house, even though he went overseas for a few weeks and she was left alone in the house. She was completely scared that he would find out somehow and that she would end up dead. She was so fearful that she would die that she wouldn't leave the house. She said she also didn't have the money to call a cab, so all round she just didn't have the means to be able to leave. She said that she didn't think of calling her mother, she didn't think of calling other family members, so she sat in the house until finally Omatoso's people gave her some money to get her hair done.
Sandy, throughout that part of the testimony today, it has been absolutely awful and harrowing to watch. At that point, she broke down on more than one occasion, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, you must remember she's now had to tell the same story at least 5 times now. She's told it over and over again. It's a very traumatic experience to have to live just once. Imagine having to live it over and over again, especially remembering the trauma of how she has stuck in a house where this hellish experience was happening. She said that every second day she was allegedly being abused by this man. Now she's stuck in this hellish house. She doesn't know how to leave. She's psychologically controlled by this man, and the experience of having to leave was frightening for her, because when she left, she told the court she threw her bag out the window, but she walked past a woman who was still awake in the house, who called everyone in the house, and as she escaped into the cab, she had all the girls come out on the street screaming and calling for her, and she was totally traumatized by the fact that all these women were telling her that she will die, that this is going to be the end for her, that her life is over. So it was a very traumatic experience, and she's now lived it at least 5 times.
Later, Sandy Makaula, in her testimony, she spoke about developing coping mechanisms, and then she also sought the help through her mother of a therapist, where she told the court today that at one point she tried to kill herself.
Yes, she had to form some coping mechanisms. One of those was drinking alcohol. Another was wearing black constantly. She was in a depression constantly. And eventually she ended up trying to take her own life. Her mother and her brother were very worried about her. Her grandmother was very worried about her. But she refused to talk about what had happened. She refused to taint the image in her grandmother's mind of this untainted child. So she refused to tell anyone what had happened, but her mother worked it out, as mothers do. They have this instinct about their children, and her mother said to her, "I think you were abused." And her mother insisted that she goes to a therapist, where she sat down with the therapist and in detail told the woman what had happened. And at that moment, she started to feel that she was getting her power back, because this man, she said, had taken her power, had taken her dignity, and had controlled her life completely. And this was a way to tell the world that she had survived, that she had got her power back and her dignity.
She was unable, Sandy, to approach police in answer to a question. Why was that?
Well, we actually saw it happen at the court recently, that these policemen who are members of the congregation call themselves protocol observers. Now, we saw 2 policewomen who were off duty trying to get into the court the other day, calling themselves protocol observers. Now, apparently, protocol observers are police people who are in the church, who wear their police uniforms, escorting Omotoso in and out the church. Apparently, they are so fanatical that they would take their actual service jackets and throw them on the floor in front of the man of God so that he could walk over their service jackets. Now, if you can imagine what the police service would think of that. She said she couldn't at any time trust a policeman because they were in the church. They were fanatical about this man. They prayed to this man, and she could not trust any policeman, so she refused to go to the police to tell them her story.
The questioning from the defense advocate has not endeared him to South Africans, Sandy. We were well aware of that yesterday and overnight, but that same hardline approach has continued today.
Yes, I tried to speak to Peter Doberman today and yesterday about his hard line he's taken and how he's not endearing himself to the people of South Africa, but he refused to speak to me. He said he doesn't speak to media during his trials, but he's definitely not endearing himself to anyone, even to the judge. The judge has had to intervene a few times to say to him, you can't speak to the witness like that. You can't ask inappropriate questions. I mean, imagine asking a question about how long the person's manhood is. The judge was even completely shocked by that question. He said, even the judge said, does she need a ruler? So, I mean, you can just imagine, it's just not right. And in the many, many cases that I've covered of sexual offences over the years, I have never seen a defence advocate take such a harsh line and such an inappropriate line with a survivor. So he has been very hard, he has been very harsh. But to remember, Cheryl, on the other hand, has been very strong and very defiant. And even when he was asking these completely inappropriate questions, she had answers for him. She was strong, she was brave, and she came back with answers and with retorts. So she has been a remarkable witness. She's been a remarkable woman throughout this trial.
Sandy Makaula, thank you in Port Elizabeth.